Hey, it's Chris, Liege Games. Today, talking to you about React, the Arts of War. What do you need to know about this two-player skirmish-esque head-to-head battler? Let's talk. So the concept of this game is very much like you've seen with a lot of other games out there, right? You've got two characters going head-to-head on a battlefield, right? No difference there, except this is doing a few different things that we need to highlight and compare to the other ones out there. And when I say the other ones out there, let's talk your usual BattleCon, Yomi, Exceeds. Those are your typical head-to-head skirmish-esque on some sort of, not really grid, but line, essentially, that you're going to be battling back and forth, moving, striking, playing cards advantageously, or turn by turn going back and forth, watching the battle swing. Some of them are more luck-filled, some of them are less luck-filled. So where does this fall? What does it compare to, and how does it seem so far? Now, with this prototype copy, I have 4 characters to start with. There are going to be more in the final edition, but I can talk to you a little bit about what these 4 bring to the table. If you're going to have 2 characters going head-to-head, the most important thing in this asymmetric stance is that the power creep or the balance is there. And so that's going to be where ultimately the biggest make it or break it is. But let's talk about the points that are going to get us there. First, let me give you an overview of the game as a whole. Like I said, we have this top-down grid. It's a 6x6 grid that you are going to be placing your standees onto, that you are going to be allocating one side to the other. And with your various characters, you may be manipulating the board itself through the use of tiles. You may be also utilizing minions that you can summon to the board around your character. And the dynamics of each of these are very, very different. The overview of this game is very, very simple. It's not like those other games where there's a massive amount of hit points and massive amounts of swing. This is first one to deal 3 damage to your opponent. And that doesn't sound like a lot, but what I need to tell you right then and there is this is a lot more tactical and a very much more strategic than some of those other head-to-head battlers that I've mentioned. It reminds me more of those, say, Exceed combined with chess, if you will. And hear me out on this. I'm going to use the chess comparison because you are slowly moving your figures across this grid, gradually assessing, poking holes in the opponent's defense, trying to see where their weaknesses can be exploited, sort of, jabbing or feinting, if you will, back and forth. And so it's overall a little bit of a slower ramp up than those other games. But when it goes, it goes. The objective of the game is to get the 3 damage, like I mentioned. You're going to be dealing it mostly 1 damage at a time as you go back and forth. And the tricky part is, we're used to just playing cards in this game. And you'll have plenty of cards to play, don't get me wrong. You have a deck here that is relatively good sized. But the tricky thing, the point number 1 that you need to know about this is, in this game, you have a deck of 30 cards made up of 4 different cards. That's not a lot, but let me tell you, that's where this game really takes its mastery on. It's not giving you tons of different things like the others of Exceed or Yomi or BattleCon, where you may have a deck that is, say, 20 cards, but 13 of them are unique or something like that. Or Soccer Arms, where you have, 10 cards, but all of them are unique. This is making you master the individual components of these cards, and it really leads to specialization because of all of how these work differently. So the basic turn overview, you're going to have at the start of the game 5 cards in your hand. You draw a card and then you play a masterpiece card. We'll talk about that in a second. And you're going to see that in your hand of cards, you have both cards that are orange and blue. The orange ones are the ones that react. And so we'll get to those in a second because that's what gives this game its namesake when it comes to that. The blue ones are your intentions. They're your main actions. And the difference with this as opposed to, say, the other games is you don't have any limited number of actions that you can take. You can go until you can't. And that is very different than what we're used to of the I go, you go, I go, you go pattern of these games typically. And what I mean by that is, say, for example, I have my 2 little ghost sprite characters and my main character here on the board. They are oriented perpendicular to each other on the board here, so you can see them. And so what's going to happen here is as you play them, you exhaust them and you turn them 90 degrees as you utilize them. And if you have no characters left that you can utilize, most of the time your turn is over. However, you can always pass before then as well. Now, the different part of this game with this is also the way you play the cards, not just the type of cards you play. So let's say I want to play this blue card, for example. Then I lay it down under the number 1 slot right here. And sometimes the numbers will be very important and sometimes they won't be. But what you do then is the opponent has the ability to play one of the orange react cards. They can't play a blue one, they can play an orange one. And so if they want to, then they could play an orange one there in the 2 slot. And if you had another orange card, then it goes back to you and you could play one here, and so on and so forth until both players pass. And then it gets resolved in the opposite order of what it was laid. So if this was my original action, by the time it gets down to this one and this one might have completely oriented the board differently, because in these situations you're going to have characters and abilities that are going to shift the board. They're going to shift the pieces, they're going to trade places with each other, they're going to put tiles down in the way of things, they're going to be laying down tokens that will explode. There's all sorts of different maneuverings both to get yourself into and out of trouble when it comes to that. The other thing that's different is with these numbers, you'll notice that there's an arrow on each of them. Some of these abilities require you to choose the orientation of the action first. So you may choose this first, but then all of a sudden, by the time these other two get laid, these other two are going to shift things. And so all of a sudden your attack that's going this way is now missed because someone else moved out of the way in the meantime. And that's the reaction that sort of gets chained back in a 3, 2, and then 1 order, if you will. So that's what you need to know about the reactions. It allows you to be very clever, but it also very much matters the timing of when you choose to use your reaction cards, because each turn you only draw 1 card. And so your hand is not going to refill quickly. There will be ways around that. There will be other ways to draw cards, but you just need to be aware that this is more a slightly slower pace than those other games that I mentioned, where attacking and battling and doing damage is ad nauseum and the main component, rather than the tactical maneuvering on the board. Because especially in those other games that I mentioned, the tactical maneuvering is really 2D. You are going back and forth across the line. There is not a 3-dimensional aspect of things where you are going X or Y. You're really only going X. And so that's actually quite refreshing, and you will use this whole board. The abilities will allow you to manipulate and go across the board, and if you do not, you will suffer a disadvantage. Now let's go back a second to the mural cards. You're going to have 3 cards that are murals. On one side, they're colored. On the other side, they're black and white to represent your health. So you can just flip it over. They're otherwise identical. And what you're going to be doing is you have on one side of the board, usually opposite these numbers, we'll clear these away for a second, you can put these murals down. And there are 5 spaces on these murals that you're going to be putting them down. And if you are able to lay your 3 mural cards down in a row, making that said picture, then you take your card of your main character. We'll talk about this little character card in a second. So what you do then is you take your main character card here, and this character then gets flipped over and they become ascended. So the ascension of them basically gives them a stronger power of whatever they would have had previously. Some of them stay ascended, some of them go very quickly ascended, descended, and some of them will stay ascended until you use one of the powers in the first place, and then it will get flipped back over. And in the meantime, you're still putting one of these cards down on a turn. And why this is just more than what meets the eye is each player is going to be putting one down on a turn. So if you can't put one down, then you can replace somebody else's. If you can replace somebody else's, then you go and do it. But you can also swap, so you can move other people's out of arrangement. And when you make the arrangement, you clear them, which then opens it up for the other person to be able to ascend much quicker as well. So it doesn't get into so much of a runaway leader situation, because otherwise I was scared that it could, if one person is able to ascend repeatedly after another and the other one isn't. Now, talking about the player characters themselves, you'll notice that on these player cards, there are actually 2 different abilities on them, and you're choosing one each time. So you have the ability or the option to choose either one. Some of them, in this case, she actually has an intention and a react. on her normal side, she has 2 different intentions. So they're going to give you options each time. Then the other character cards that I mentioned, the allies, if you will, your little spirits in her case, each of them has their own individual cards as well that you can utilize as putting it out here in one of the intention slots. And so when you play a character card or a minion card into the intention slot, it's not lost or discarded. It just gets used, and then you rotate your character to show that they're exhausted. And you can't do them again, obviously. But if any other card in your deck of those 4 different types that I mentioned that are going to be in there get played, then those go to the discard pile. The game also ends if you can't draw another card. One last case in point, we'll talk about the painter here, for example. We'll talk about her because she is one that I'm very familiar with after several games. She has these ink tokens, and a majority of her abilities revolve around the way in which and how she inks standees on the board. Not only her own, but any standee potentially on the board, because a lot of her powers will allow you to manipulate standees with ink on them or remove the ink to manipulate them. And so all of her powers are going to be affected or related to that. And so it's a different way of manipulation. The Tiger, for example, here is different. The Tiger is going to be bouncing around quickly, trying to be in and out. He has mural tiles that he's actually going to be placing, and he's going to be trying to either jump on them himself or make other people jump on them because he can trigger them to do a damage on the tile itself or on a tile that's adjacent, not a tile, but a hex or a square that's adjacent to one of these. So he's going to be trying to manipulate other people into these areas. The other person I played a lot with, the Dancer here, the Dancer, as you can see a little bit better illustrated there, the Dancer actually does a lot of twisting and rotating and standee swapping with their reaction cards. So they're dancing, trying to get out of the way elegantly, thematically incorporated in that way. They're also having fish that they can summon, but they can only summon fish if they have 3 tokens in an area, and then they summon it to that area. So that is slightly different as well. And then this is going to be manipulatable on these areas of the tokens that they lay down, for example. And it also has the ability to do a damage when 3 of these tokens get put into an area if a standee is already there. So again, different in the asymmetry. What may you like about this game? Well, first off, I was a little concerned that this was going to be too similar to other 2-player head-to-head skirmish games like I've mentioned. Yomi, Exceed, BattleCon, Twisted Fables, Soccer Arms. You know, I own all of those games. And I'll be straightforward with you guys that this doesn't feel like any of those. It doesn't. And I mean that in a good way. I mean that in, if you're looking for something that's a little bit longer, and especially with the XY movement on the grid-based map here, this provides something that those other ones don't, because they're mostly just along one axis of movement. You know, it's back and forth and sometimes swapping over, but there's nothing more spatial. And so this is going to provide you more of that. And the abilities are actually a lot more asymmetric than I realized as well about how they interact. I mean, my wife played as her the first time, right? She did not like the ink. She did not like manipulating the ink and the spirits and how it all moved. And I was the Dancer, and I was twisting and turning and jutting out and jumping over her standees, and she just hated it. And I beat her 3-0. But it's going to definitely have a character or two, just like those other games, where you have a play style that you prefer. And it's going to allow you to experiment in a very good way. But the games are going to be a little bit longer, and that's something that you just need to know. If you're looking, or you're saying that those card games are a little bit too random, if they have a little bit less perfect information, like Exceed, or even Sakura Arms, or Twisted Fables, this may be more appealing. The other problem with all those games that I mentioned is the majority of them have so many powers for just even one character. You have to play a character, you know, half a dozen times to get a good feel for the meta strategy, for what you're actually trying to do, how you're linking the powers together. In a game or two, because you only have 4 different cards here in your whole deck, you get a relatively quick assessment of what it's actually going to do and what it's actually going to be like, and how these cards are going to be able to be chained together and react, not only to get yourself into position, but out of those dangerous positions as well when you start to come under attack. But when is the opportune time to use those cards? Because I'll flat out say a lot of those other games don't give you necessarily as big of opportunity to react, right? If you're playing BattleCon, for example, you both lay simultaneously. If you're playing Exceed, I play and then you play. And sometimes, you get the play together when you're battling, but a lot of it is not in terms of reacting. It's trying to guess what the other person is going to do before they do it. And there's a lot of metagaming in that sense, and trying to outthink and outguess rather than out-strategize. That's why people like Battlecom, because you can be more strategic and, okay, I know they've played this. This must be in this pile. This must be in this pile. This must be in this pile. There's more perfect information. Now, there's not perfect information in this because you're drawing cards and you have a hand, but it's closer in terms of, well, the 4 actions that you can do, but you also know the 4 actions after a game or two of what the other characters are capable of. What may people not like in that sense? This game is a little bit slower in terms of the ramp up, in terms of, if I play Exceed, if I play Soccer Arms, right, it's boom, right into the action. It's not going to take, 6 or 8 turns before someone may deal some damage, right? Exceed, turn 2 or 3, boom, someone's taken damage, they've taken a quarter of their health gone, and all of a sudden things are going, sparks are flying, and boom. In this, there's a lot of summoning, there's a lot of positioning, there's a lot of build up. And this one, in terms of build up, has a lot more than any of those. And this is really going to take you 45 to 60 minutes if you're really being strategic. It's going to be on the longer side of things. And I can see people who are looking for something shorter that may not necessarily like that. And that's where I'm going to go back to the comparison to chess, is because if you play at a lower level, there will definitely be games where it's more like talk, where all of a sudden you're playing talk and you have those little pieces and you miss a move and all of a sudden they connect one side to the other and boom, it's over, and you miss that and you go, duh. And that will happen with this, with sometimes how you can arrange these or how you can jump them over from one to the other and manipulate them or outreact someone else. But at a more competitive, even experienced playing field, there's going to be a lot more feinting, jabbing, twisting, and just very careful positioning. This game is going to reward a lot more patience rather than guessing in some of those other games. And I don't mean that as a bad thing, right? Like, I love the guessing of Exceed. I love the trying to outguess, the trying to multi-play cards in terms of different ways of playing them and how to best utilize them. And okay, here you go, and boom, awesome, power up transformation, overpowered is sweet, combo cards together. I love that. But this offers something different in its strategic and tactical depth by use of this field, as well as the use of the minions and the asymmetric powers that I just haven't seen before. The other thing you may not like, for example, with the calligrapher here, she doesn't deal damage. Only her spirits deal damage. And so she is manipulating, but she is not dealing direct damage. And that's going to be very frustrating for you depending on your playstyle, for example. And you're going to find playstyles, like I said with my wife, she was not a fan of this. She did not like having to go through the spirits for play. And so she was much more a fan of this guy, or the other, who is a long-ranged melee combination going back and forth using dice and blocking and combat. So me, personally, the dancer fit well because I liked twisting and escaping at the last second and manipulating and sacrificing even my own minions in order to get out of harm's way. I love that quick thinking shrewdness of a game. But that's going to be where your mileage may vary, just like with any of these more abstract or more asymmetric games where this is a key component. I'm thinking of the more recently Mythic Mischief from IV Games, right? There were a couple teams in there that I just didn't click with, my wife just didn't click with, that we clicked or we preferred, and it reminds me very much of this. Now, I'll say, again, I think there's supposed to be about maybe 8 characters total, and I only have access to 4. And so I definitely have my preferences. My wife definitely has her preferences after a couple plays. And so I'm imagining that with the 4 other ones, there'll be branching out. And that's no different, though, than, say, Yomi, say, BattleCon, for sure. Exceed even to a lesser extent, but even with that as well. The other thing I can see people not liking, right, is the initiative tokens. The initiative to mark, okay, what order are we reacting in? What order are we going in terms of resolving these cards? Some of the cards make you tell your intention, the intention in the first place, hence the name of the card, not only what one you're choosing on the card, because some of them have 2 options, but it also makes you choose the direction. And you're not going to have the ability to choose the direction or change the direction after you've played it. So if you choose this and someone else reacts, that's going to be really frustrating to you potentially if you don't like that. I mean, the example that I had during my game was very similar to the one that Brother Ming does on the overview video on his how to play. where I switched places because this attack targeted an area. I switched places with my wife's character, and her damage did damage to the area that this is pointing in that her standee was in now instead of mine. And so that really frustrated her as, our first time playing. And just having to position these and, directionality really mattering even before the action goes, not knowing what your opponent will do. I can see people being very frustrated by that or not liking to be able to give out that information of their strategy before it being fully achieved or finished in terms of its action, and having the ability for the opponent to, react. And that's the nature of the game, though, is having these chained combos and trying to outchain your opponent rather than just one-off outbeat them in that way. Personally speaking, I like it. I didn't like it in the first game, but once you realize what you can do in terms of manipulating those and how you can outmaneuver them, then it clicked, and then I really enjoyed it. But yeah, I didn't like it at first. It sounded and seemed counterintuitive to give that information away, to pre-select or preset that information while other things were still being able to happen before my reaction could be resolved. But sometimes the cool thing is, you lay down this intention card, and by the time you actually get down to this intention card, after you've played the 4, 3, 2, and then the 1 with all the other reacts first, you go, oh, this card's still going on? Oh, yeah, I actually have to resolve this because there's been so much change otherwise on the battlefield to make it seem so fluid that it's just like, oh, wow. Wow, that was really nifty. That was all one round of an action. Kind of cool. The other big thing that I could see people not liking, and, again, in our first game or two, especially with a few of these characters like the calligrapher as well as the dancer, there's a little bit too slow of a build-up sometimes. Like as the dancer, for example, I have to get 3 of these little scale tokens on an area in order to summon my fish. Well, I can't do damage without my fish. And so I'm literally just moving my character back and forth sometimes to get them over this area, because as I pass over them, for example, or as I pass through them, I lay one of these down, essentially. So my first couple turns are literally just going back and forth, and that's a little bit anticlimactic in a game that's supposed to be more head-to-head. Now, again, I'm not designing this, I'm not, figuring it out from the balance standpoint, and I don't know what's in store for the other 4 characters, but that'd be the thing that I could see, okay, if it takes me so long to build up with the calligrapher, for example, as well, in order to get enough of these spirits on the board and get them inked and get them close, because again, they're only moving one space at a time, that's a long ways to get across the board when you're going a 6x6 grid, especially when you have another character, again, like I mentioned, with the dancer or the tagger, they can be jumping 3, 4 spots easily in one turn. So again, that's just something I can see people not liking if it's too slow of a build-up when you're looking for a wham-bam game. Not necessarily like all of the attacking, but just if I'm only moving slowly back and forth in one place, that's not what I signed up for in this game either. Again, to speed up, to get to that point of the elegant fluidness that the latter portions of the game really give an excellent job for. The other thing I still have a little bit of mixed feeling on is the mural cards themselves. You can be really take that, or you both can just kind of let it go and both ascend and utilize them in that way. And so that's going to be sort of something that I can see you heavily strategizing and utilizing a lot on that side, because as one of your second abilities on your main character card, you can do an extra mural manipulation, essentially. Or it could be something that you guys just completely ignore and let other people go, which is okay in some situations. But for example, like I said with the painter has to ascend to be able to do damage. So if someone is preventing me from ascending, well, with the tagger or with the calligrapher, that's less of a big deal because they can still deal damage without ascending. The painter can't. And so that's something I could see being a real problem down the line, especially if you get someone that knows, like if I know I'm playing against the painter and they have to ascend, well, I'm going to do everything in my power to manipulate that. And that's going to basically make their gameplay a whole heck of a lot harder, because they're just never going to be able to do me damage until they do that. But I can't wait to see at the same time what the other 4 characters or so are going to bring that are going to be different. So final thoughts on this. This is a very elegant game. I was not expecting this to be as elegant as it is. That's probably the make it or break it. With a lot of those other games, with Battlecon's pretty elegant. Exceed is a smash 'em up, outthink 'em. Yomi is a little bit of a mix, and Sakura Arms is sort of a grab bag depending on the cards you go in with, right? And so the elegance on this board, it really does a lot more than I was expecting in terms of the X and Y combat of moving them back and forth, because I wasn't expecting that to be as big of a component, because I see a lot of other two-player skirmish games where they turn out to be, you know, I put my guy here, you put your guy here, we move together, and then we just hack and slash until somebody can knock the other one out, right? And then off the board, respawn, and repeat. And this has a lot more positioning and maneuvering and manipulating and moving around in that way. And it was really refreshing. A lot of these games, and the problem with them, is they seem very random and they seem very haphazard. It doesn't always feel like you triumphed because you actually triumphed. It feels like you triumphed because of sheer luck or a better guess than the other person. With the ability to manipulate not only your individual characters, your minions, or even the other team with this game, it's just makes it more satisfying when you outplay your opponent, because it feels like you outplayed them rather than just outlucked them. And that can't be understated in a game like this, where oftentimes it is just feeling like I guessed better than you did, or I smashed you faster than you smashed me, right? It is a little bit longer though, and so it's not going to be as pick up and play easy in that sense, in terms of the strategy that you can just have sometimes with a pre-built Exceed deck. Much easier than Battlecon. Battlecon's meta, I'd say, is further higher up than this. Same thing with Yomi. But this gives you a little bit of an in-between with a little bit longer time. That's going to, again, like I mentioned, reward patience and perseverance rather than just bash you over the head tactical nature. So if you're looking for bash you over the head, smash, grab, bang, boom, there you go. This game is not going to be for you. But if you want to have some very elegant, very tactical nature games of back and forth, this is really outstanding. And let me just say, I don't comment on this, but I am all the way Team Standee. And these are some of, if not the nicest acrylic standees I have seen. These are right up there with Uprising, Curse of the Last Emperor in terms of the quality, and these are actually massive. I mean, these are big standees. So for the price point, I'm guessing that this is going to be, you're going to get your money's worth though, because both of these are neoprene playmats as well. And you're going to have a bunch of characters that go along with this. I mean, this one, for example, she has 4. Her and her 3 spirits. The painter has 3 fish spirits. Actually, the calligrapher has 4, and so the painter has 3, and so there's going to be a whole bunch of that as well. So it's not skimping on quality from that aspect, even already on the prototype. And I didn't even mention this, but each character also has a passive ability that tells you how they play. And the nice thing about this at the end is they actually tell you the play style. Like this is what you should try and do. It's not like, okay, guess what they should do. It gives you a little bit of a hint in terms of, okay, try and play like this, and you'll try and maximize the character's effectiveness too. So that's just nice, a nice little blurb right there to help you out. So there you go. Those are my thoughts on React. Let me know what you think. Let me know if you have comments, questions, or concerns down below. And I'll throw the link into the crowdfunding page as well in the description. So that's it. Thanks for watching. As always, do the YouTube thing if you like it. Let me know. Stay classy. See you around.